you were previously a power plant engineer in Japan and then became a food marketer in ASEAN. How did you make the transition from engineering to marketing?
So, first of all, I went to Japan in about 2015. I was hired directly by a company over there from a university. And then, in a typical Japanese company, there are certain rules and defined by the society where certain characters like me are not particularly tolerated. So, in a power plant or in energy sector, the industry is very traditional. So, in a traditional industry, things like the new age trends, new thinking are something which is not a competitive advantage, as by the virtue of what work we do. So I used to spend about 15, 16 hours every day at work. Whenever I used to go to the construction site overseas, the latest I was in Malaysia. It was about like 7 days a week. At 2 a.m. we used to come back. At 7 a.m. we used to again go back to the site. I used to manage workers, liaise with the consultants and the government whose project it was. So it was interesting in a way that you get a lot of exposure, but somehow I was feeling like I have always been interested in food. I have conducted food tours in Delhi when I was a student. So when I was in Japan, so I used to have this little bit of escapades, go do some food tours, bring foreigners to the local Japanese and of course the Indian restaurants over there. And it was a passion project which slowly culminated into, okay, maybe I can give it a shot. So I also helped a restaurant over there to in their back-end operations. So I just went up to that restaurant. I said, "Hey, I just want to do something in F&B. I don't know what. I have done XYZ thing. Just let me help you out because running operations in Japan is anyway not going to be cheap." So in my holidays, I was just helping the person out. I realized, yeah, it's something I think I can really carve a career in. Then I was thinking, okay, which location is perfect career? And I just came to Singapore to pursue my MBA. Now, in my MBA, I reached out to random startups, restaurants, asked them, hey, I can be a floor manager, I can help you with your bar, or if it's a digital startup, it was pre COVID time. Maybe I can help you with some of your back end presentation work as you were speaking. And just wanted to get some food exposure before going into a full fledged career. So, yeah, luckily I got a few opportunities. I even started my own sandwich business back in NTU during my MBA. It was a very short, like 2 months, 3 months period where I was like really gung ho about starting my own business. And if nobody's giving me the opportunity, maybe rather I create my own. So I started in the hostel, the pantry area. Nobody cooks in Singapore, especially in a guy hostel. So I occupied that kitchen, used to make healthy sandwiches, used to give to the students over there and make some side income. I realized it's a really tough job starting your own business. It's not as easy as it sounds. And of course, I was studying full time, so that also took some toll. Then, fortunately, amongst many companies, Dole decided to hire me. Yeah. So, yeah, that's how I embarked on this journey.
Quite a wild ride. Now, I'm curious, there's a couple different things I want to ask you about. One of which is, what was the
Yeah.
difference in working in Japan? You talked about the working 7 days a week, 15, 16-hour days versus the switch now in ASEAN. What has been the biggest kind of shift in terms of working differences?
The biggest difference I found was working in Japan is okay. Japan, I was in Yokohama, it's a neighboring city to Tokyo. The workplace is very homogeneous in terms of ethnicities and sometimes in ideas as well. So when you are working in a very homogeneous environment, the variety of thoughts coming from foreigners are in minority, and you have to work a lot harder, present a lot more evidence to change the status quo. Whereas working in Singapore has been a pleasure so far. Like people like you, we are not, I mean, our generations have not been raised here, I assume.
Yeah.
Even then, some like our thought processes are, I would say, accepted. We can prosper here. And there are multiple industries you can go into. Other thing, which I mean, needless to say, there's a language barrier. So although I learned Japanese, there's always a cultural. I just felt maybe it's not the case. A cultural glass ceiling that prevents you. to fully explore your potential. You go to any country which is linguistically, culturally very distinct. If you go as a foreigner, you really have to maybe 5x your efforts to integrate and make a mark and be accepted. In Singapore, I never felt like this, especially at Dole or even with other companies I worked part time. I never felt it this way. I think the talent is supreme here. So yeah, that's like the key difference, those two key differences which I faced.
That makes sense. Now, you talked about you came to Singapore, you wanted to break into the food industry, and you reached out to all different companies. What kind of messaging were you sending out, and what worked in during that
Yeah.
process?
Okay. Okay. Let me recollect my thoughts because it's been now 5 years since I've done that, 4, 5 years. Okay. So if it's a startup, I know that I've shared this on LinkedIn as well, but my strategy used to be I used to search, okay, which are the startups in Singapore who have recently raised some funding, or if there's any news about them, some positive news, like they're not going down under. If they are, then they're not going to give me any work. So I would just reach out to them. If they have given any interview, just research a little bit about the founder, anticipate what challenges they might be having. So sometimes I used to just send a PowerPoint deck about how I can help. This is my idea about their company. And the filter was, yes, if somebody has raised a recent funding, somebody has gotten a positive news, a new contract, some new store opening, I would just reach out to them. So that was more for the food tech startups. Now, for the offline ones, I would just ask, hey, why? It's a known fact it's very hard to get any manpower in Singapore at a lower rate. So I would just go and reach out to them. Hey, can I just help you out in your operations? But of course, being a student, visa was an issue. There was a certain number of hours that we could work, which did not sync up perfectly. So I could only work in the, I would say, in the white collared setting. Yeah. So yeah, messaging wise, if it's a startup, I already told you, filter who has raised the funds, reach out to them, track their online presence, what problem they might be facing, and if there is any confluence of your skills with their problem statement, you can, of course, pitch yourself. That's a very standard process. If it was any offline one, I would make it a bit more person specific. Let's say if it's a, I can't name the company, but let's say if it's a big company and there's a particular department of theirs, and then that person has shared something online, I would just pitch myself to be at service of that particular person rather than the company, because the company is much bigger, right? You can fit anywhere. Yeah.
Great point. So if I heard that correctly, if it's a smaller company, you will, for example, a startup, you will find out if they've raised any money recently, and you'll reach out to the founder
Yeah.
and share some kind of,
Yes.
after anticipating their challenges, share a PowerPoint with some ideas based on what you understand
Yes.
from their situation. And then for the multinational, you talked about identifying specific people, following them on,
Yeah.
say, social media, and then reaching out to them
Yes.
and offering to help them at an individual level, not necessarily at a company level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the information is, I would say, much less public on how they operate. So as a student, I couldn't just crack that. Like particularly what new projects would come up. It's more discreet rather than in startup.
And that approach has worked for you?
Yes, it has worked tremendously. In fact, I advise everyone, if there's an event, reach out to that particular person. If you're tracking somebody, usually the founders or the industry folks usually go as guest speakers. You can even buy a ticket to that event and be a part of that and pitch yourself. So I've done everything, whatever you, in fact, sending items to, like sending some snacks to people. I've also done that. It hasn't worked in my favor, but at least I tried. So yeah, I ended up getting 9 part-time internships and jobs, mix of both. At the end of my 10-month program, there were companies which were, of course, conglomerates, 2 startups. It includes internships. It's not like all 9 hour jobs. Yeah.
Yeah. So a
So I,
really good
yeah,
point.
it's all basics of network.
Yeah. So you bring up a really good
Sorry.
point. This is something I was sharing with my students last week. Is you talked about finding someone who's speaking at an event and then pitching to them. Take us to that process. Maybe give us a specific example of what you've done previously.
Let's say the biggest perk of being a student is everybody, I would say most of the people are trying to help you out. So you can, of course, go to event or go to, if you're in a good university, they will hold some events which are for the pan university, right? It's not department related. So you can just drop by. The speaker details are there, or even in a non-university event, let's say on Eventbrite, that speaker details are there. If that somebody interests you, just drop by and genuinely try to reach, I would say, 15-20 minutes before, because it removes hesitation in engaging with other people. When you have almost nothing to offer, but it's an asymmetric kind of a relationship where you're asking some favor. And I have felt in my initial engagements that although I had experience in another global domain, I always used to feel very nervous. So I used to show up 15-20 minutes before the event and just smile at people, chit chat, do small talk with the organizers, with the person who's signing you in, and then try and listen to the conversation. That's the biggest insight. If it's a speaker, they would definitely be on a panel or they would be giving a talk. Try and get those points. There will be some hook points to talk about, right? What did you like? And it can also give you a view whether your previous assessment of the person or the work actually matches or not. If it does not, if it's like totally off track, yeah, you came here, you met amazing people, there's no loss. But very rarely that happens. It's always better to go there and share what you like, your feedback. And then I think the person would definitely engage with you considering you're a student. Always tell that you're a student. A lot of the times people hide that fact that they're students because they have a certain status previously. So they would say, yeah, I used to be in X PWC and then this and that. There's hardly any need to do that. So yeah, and then once you engage with a point that they have made during their speech or during their panel discussion, they would really appreciate, because hardly anyone walks up to them and talks about the content they just shared. People go there and pitch. Pitch about the business, pitch about XYZ thing, the next event. I have never seen somebody asking about their content you shared. Like, hey, that was an interesting quote. Where did you read it? Did you face certain things in your life? Try to extrapolate. And sorry, one more point. Even before that, there's always a Q&A session you can always utilize to warm the relationship a little bit up. So I've done everything. Yeah.
Yeah, you're much more braver than I am. I'm extremely introverted, and so I'm terrible at the chit chat of the small talk. I'm usually very comfortable on stage. Once I get off stage, I feel very uncomfortable. It sounds like you don't
Wow.
necessarily have that challenge.
That's a unique.
Yeah. I'm curious, how do you follow up with these people now that do you connect with them on LinkedIn? If so, what happens after that?
Okay. I remember at least one incident which is very distinct in my memory. Usually people would ask you to meet if they're interested.
Mhm.
I have been ghosted. That happens all the time. But if something can be worked out, then they would ask you to meet again. And by meeting, virtual meeting or offline, of course, anything can happen. They would ask you to meet again. And then you take forward from that. One incident which happened was I had a second follow up. I then discussed about what I have been working. And the person's assessment of me was a little bit different. They were thinking I come from a consumer goods background, but in fact, I was in Toshiba. So Toshiba does everything, right? But I was in a very different setting altogether. So their assessment and their goals were different. Yeah, it's fine. At least you had a good conversation. And yeah, in case if the person does not reach out, it's always good to text them the next day, thank them the same day, but text back if they have promised you for a follow up, a connection, or a meeting, or a video call the next day. The longer you take, the busier the person gets.
Absolutely, out of sight, out of mind. And these are great tips. These are
Definitely.
something I keep telling all my students, but it's good to hear from a third party person who's actually implemented some of these things and it's worked out for them. So I really appreciate you sharing that so far.
No, thanks a lot. And your video is back now.
Yeah. And another thing, how we actually found each other was on LinkedIn, and you've been very active on the platform,
Yeah.
sharing insights, stories, and so on. I'm curious, how has that impacted your career as well, too?
Okay. Very interesting take on LinkedIn. So I had relatively free time at Dole. Relatively, I would say. Now I can confess. Now that I'm out, there are certain periods of high pressure and low ones. I have always written on multiple platforms, whether it's WordPress, writing poetry, to Quora, writing cringe content on Quora, very cringe content. I was very young. So I always used to write those things, but I never got a perfect platform in a consistent manner. I thought maybe LinkedIn provides you that opportunity to be vulnerable. People are less, people won't flag you down, right? They won't, it's not Twitter, it's not YouTube content, and it's easier. You have been writing emails, you have been writing report, the content is format similar, so it's easy. So I had some free time. I started off as a personal finance guy initially, but then I realized my tank is not that deep. I would rather focus on what I have been going through in my career. At that time, it was marketing, B2C marketing, FMCG marketing. And I wrote random stuff for about 6, 9 months, some random stuff around marketing, around career, or any other thing, any other observation which I had around copywriting, even, which I was discovering before I found my voice. So I was writing a lot of different things. I would get feedback. Of course, the follower counts and everything are a byproduct of that. Initially, when I started writing on LinkedIn, people in my company used to mock at me that you just have very less experience in this industry. Even my super manager, he used to be like, he was mocking me at one of the events. I think he might even, yeah, he was mocking me at one of the events, and he said, this guy, he's giving now tips on marketing, on copywriting, and all of that, and sharing he's now a superstar on LinkedIn. And I was like, yeah, I know it's sarcastic, but I was just smiling at that moment. So I didn't take it in a certain manner, because whenever you try new things, definitely you'll have some sort of a criticism. Now, the good part is, over a period of time, I have built good relationships, warm, hot, cold, whatever, with people like you. In fact, that person has now come on my side and asked me for tips. Not kidding, seriously. And that person has also started writing on LinkedIn occasionally and sharing content on LinkedIn, being on LinkedIn. So I always feel at least you need to show up, because nobody else will make your case other than you. Yeah. And there are other opportunities, like in recruiting, during recruitment period, when you're looking out for job, it's also helpful if you have shared some content, because everyone's watching you versus a candidate who's totally cold.
Absolutely. There's two key points you talked about. One of which is if you're looking for a job during the recruitment period. The other is if you are currently in a job. And I've seen this in my previous companies
Yeah.
where a young lady was relatively lesser known within the company, but she was very well known on LinkedIn. And as a result, she actually
Mm-hmm.
gained a much
Okay.
bigger presence and an audience with the executives because she was so well known on LinkedIn. But you also bring up a good point going
Absolutely.
back to, yeah,
Mm.
going back to manager support, because I've been on LinkedIn for many years, and I've had bosses during that time, and I've always had a mixed review. Some were very supportive, some were very against it, maybe because I went against the company's kind of point of view. Others were, I don't
Uh-huh.
know, jealous is the word, but there was a
Yes.
sense of that jealousy. And so for me, I think it goes back to identifying the kind of manager you want to work for, because it's a good test. If you have someone who's supporting you, saying, "Hey, you know what? You're putting out some good stuff. I have a couple of some feedback.
Yeah.
That's fine." Versus those who are like, "Hey, why are you
Yeah.
doing that? Why are you so junior? Why are you wasting your time? Why are you putting stuff
Yeah.
out there?" So I think in those
There are,
moments, you can really find out who's a good boss and who's not.
that's a wonderful point. The benefit in my case was I was a marketer. So as a marketer, you can always say you're bringing the Dole brand, or you're bringing up the company's brand. I think the people, your detractors who try to criticize you, they come from two places. One is definitely jealousy, and you can feel it. There's no template to it. You can feel it. Others are just ignorant. Seriously, because of certain, yeah, today if I start making TikTok videos, even my wife's gonna think I'm crazy, even though she's almost my age, right? Because they're just not aware of the potential of a particular platform. So I just try to educate them. Even if after that they criticize, it's fine, man. It's everyone has their own journey. Yeah, I would rather try and fail rather than do nothing. One very important point I would like to share is, I have never shared this earlier. Maybe in the future, once we become content creators, sharing our personal journey, if you're in a job, if you go out and do the final negotiation, you can always bring this point: hey, I've got like a 50K followers who listen to me, and I can be a voice for your company. I can save you so many organic impressions. I can save you so many this PR expenditure other than my profile. So you need not be a marketer. You can be an R&D head, but you can still try and educate people about your company, about your job, and still save a lot of marketing dollars for your company. So upside is 5 years down the line, you're going to have a lot more negotiation power.
Yeah, I love that idea. I hadn't thought about it that way, but you could actually use it as leverage if you are, say, interviewing
Yes.
for a job. If you're not in marketing, you could say, look, I have this audience. So even from an employer branding point of view, hey, you could use me as an employer branding ambassador. I have 20, 30,000 followers. Leverage by
Yeah.
network. Or if you're in marketing or you're trying to, I'm also thinking because you'll have people who, once again, you'll have those ego hungry bosses say, hey, look, I have this platform that has like 30, 40,000 platforms. I will feature you on it. I will interview you, or I will feature some of your good work, and you make them
Yeah.
happy. So you're thinking about how your audience is going to benefit each of the different stakeholders in the organization, and using that as a leverage or an advantage when you are A, trying to get a job, or B, maybe it's around promotion time or raise time. And I think that tip
Yes.
is very helpful.
Yes. You just have to ask. Just ask people that this is me, this is how I can provide value. If not, anyway, it's going to be a regular negotiation round. So you'll be fine.
Absolutely. I love it. Now, is there anything I haven't asked you, and any tips or anything that you've learned recently that you would like to share with the audience?
So I don't want to be pedantic about it, but I have had some experience across MNC and now in the startup world. I have been supporting this new company for a while now. One of the things I realized is, especially among the young folks, that you really need to get your hands dirty in a lot of things. You really need to try and embrace the operational jobs first before going for those coveted strategy roles. I always ask, even if you're a consulting career, you start as a data analyst, you start as a business analyst, and then you move up. Rather than, let's say, particularly after MBA, a lot of the students do not see FMCG as a very reputed, coveted career to be in. They would rather go into consulting, finance, and others. But the joy of creating something, the knowledge that you get, the solid foundation that you build, is immensely valuable as you grow. So while you're young, just try to do as much as hands-on work. Try to meet as many people as you want. Maybe meet one new person every week, and that will take you miles further than your competitors.
I love that so much. And I completely agree about getting your hands dirty and putting in the sweat and the work before you move up. Shoham, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your career story. I found it super enlightening. So I really appreciate you coming to the show and sharing it with us.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for inviting me. We can, of course, always meet offline and discuss at length.
Absolutely happy to do that. And thanks to everyone watching and listening to today's episode. We'll see you on the next episode.